Hey everybody, welcome back to the channel. And today we're actually going to get into another note of thought because I was watching a little bit of additional content actually that was talking about not directly the subject of, but glanced over kind of the topic of dating men and women, and there was a person who was kind of speaking in this. It was like a podcast in which you kind of saw how the idea of like men who, I also had this kind of discussion with some friends of mine as well. They kind of linked to the same kind of topic, where you have certain men who they are getting women to say either pay for things for them, or the man is either living with the woman, like she has an apartment, she's there living with the woman, and then you have other scenarios where for the women, that women who are looking for guys who are going to check all the boxes. And I just want to, in thinking that it's going to be a relationship that is possible, I'm looking for this guy who checks all the boxes. Essentially, both of these two categories kind of came up in a podcast I was watching. I just kind of want to comment on that kind of general topic. So first, addressing the concept of a guy, who or what is the kind of guy that usually is in that kind of situation. Generally, the ones who where he's getting the girl to will either meet him halfway or pay for a lot of things, and he's able to try to build, whether he's trying to build on a life or whether direction he's going to take it. The point is that it starts with him being able to have the woman play that role. Generally speaking, the guys who are able to do that, and I had this conversation with someone before about how guys who are usually in a young age, when you're in your 20s, young 20s for women and men, when you're in your 20s and your young 20s, generally speaking, the only thing that a guy really has to offer in his young 20s, we're talking about maybe like 24 and below, is just really his looks, his charisma, whatever the case is. It's in that stage where you have a lot of guys who, like, women will go, okay, that guy's cute, he's attractive, he's all these kind of things other than monetary, because that's all you could kind of really bring at the table at that time, and they will like him a lot, they want to get with him. Then you have other guys who might not be as attractive, so they got to kind of do more at that age to try to work around it, which is the inspiration for guys in the young 20s sometimes to become builders, to start getting their life together. So in that kind of scenario, when people speak about those kind of guys, and women later on down the line might say like, oh, because this is what the podcast was kind of alluding to, like the topic on that particular podcast. I'm not going to say what podcast was, but was getting at the fact of, one woman said about, one time I was in a situation where a guy, I was paying for him and doing all this kind of stuff for him, and he didn't end up being what I thought he was going to be. I actually heard this from other people too, outside of the realm of social media, but just talking in person, where they would say, I dated a guy, and I was investing, I was working, I was putting all my time, and he wasn't doing nothing, he wasn't inspiring to do anything. That general type of guy, he gets a lot of women early on, usually very attractive, charismatic, whatever the case is, very carefree, gets a lot of women early on. And what happens is, because normally the opposite sex is your inspiration to start building, that same kind of guy often doesn't strive to start building right away, or it's not a priority for him right away to start building his life right away, because there's no need. He has everything he needs, he has everything he wants, so there's no need to build, and everything he wants generally is going to revolve around women. If you're getting women and you're being able to have sex with a lot of women, which is what you're, for a young guy, that's what he's hoping to have, that becomes the catalyst, or it's the inspiration. It's similar to the way that people in this new man space inform women that, hey, if you're running around always getting a whole bunch of guys, an abundance of guys, you're going to take it for granted. You're going to, generally speaking, feel like, okay, that's never going to end. So up until the time where I get to my 30s and 40s, I'm going to think that never ends. Even though it does become a shortage, you think it's never going to end. So what happens is you treat it as so. The same happens for a small percent of men who, because they're getting this abundance of women, they don't care about the need to build for the purpose of getting and attaining women, which is the catalyst for why a lot of men, the average man, normally goes into build mode, is because he says, if I don't become quote unquote a high value guy, or somebody who has something to offer, then I'm not going to be able to be successful with women. So in that case, what happens is they go into build mode. So just kind of piggybacking on the concept that same kind of guy, and some women will complain about that down the line, that just identifying that kind of person versus the average guy, they have such an abundance. That's the reason why they don't go into build mode. So for any woman who may, question that, or say, why is it that you have men like that who, I did this for them, I did that for them. If you're doing stuff for the man, then it means that the man is, that dynamic is not your typical dynamic. And you have to understand that man then has so many options, which is why the woman is so appealed by him in the first place. He has so many options that your luck of expecting him to build is next to none, or at least not on your time frame that you'd want him to build, because he knows that he has you already, and you're not a commodity that he values at all. Because if he did value you at all, the roles would be reversed, and he'd probably be trying to work to maintain or hold you, or to get you, as opposed to saying, like, I got you already, without doing any kind of work. Then the other kind of thing, which even though it went to kind of the blurred topics, but so it kind of would be a separate topic, but because it was in the same kind of general conversation on the podcast I was looking at, I'm going to mention this too. There's a lot of women out there who think that when it comes to guys, now the type of guy I just mentioned previously, they don't care about him checking any boxes, because a lot of times they say, I'll let him try to check more boxes down the line, because he checks the box that's most important to me, which is that initial attraction, that initial spark, whatever you want to call it, vibing with the person, whatever the case is. But in the case when a person's just looking at their checklist, and a woman's going through a checklist, a lot of times they want a guy to check all these kind of boxes and say, I want the guy to check all these kind of things. I want him to be handsome, charismatic, a builder. I want to build all these things. But when they say that and they create that list, generally speaking, that checklist box is to weed out and to block any guy that doesn't check the box of attraction and that kind of initial connection, that kind of charismatic, that kind of initial, like, oh man, I want to get with this guy real bad, that kind of fire, that spice, whatever you want to label it. The checklist is just to be an excuse not to get with someone else who does not fit that initial criteria, like the first guy I just mentioned in that kind of scenario. That's all the checklist is for. But that checklist essentially is something that can never be met. It's asking for perfection. And a lot of times you have women who say that, and like I said, I this topic came up because I was watching a podcast where a female was stating in it that, what she's looking for is things like, a guy to have, be a down-to-earth, compassionate guy, all these kind of things. They even said, I want to save, even though they already had sex before, they wanted to say, I want to save from having sex. I want to be like a new born again virgin, quote unquote, or something like that, abstinence. And I don't want to have sex until, like that person, I know that person's the right person, and maybe get married, even though they already had sex before. So it's almost like a way of putting a blocker on the guys that are probably going to be fitting for them. But the worst part about it is that if they realistically think that checklist is going to be actually met, it's not. It doesn't exist. Now, going back to what we said about the guy who has abundance, with females who have abundance, they think that it's okay to have a checklist like that, because their state of mind is, the well is never going to run dry, so I can be as picky as that. The problem is that you run up your most beneficial or valuable years, and then what ends up happening at the end of that is, now the well does run up dry, and those same demands you had, not only can you not have them anymore, but you now have to drastically lower your checklist or your demands or your standards just to even get somebody to even talk to you. Once you start going into the 35, 40 range, or whatever the case is, especially when it's a high value guy who makes good money, has a good head on his shoulders, confidence, and he knows what he wants. So that's just kind of a note to kind of put out there, that for people who have that checklist, get rid of the checklist. You're going to do what you want, but just letting you know that that checklist is just a roadblock. and society is kind of really upside down right now. But just pointing out these two things, like I said, a note of thought, pointing out these kind of two things because I was watching a podcast. I just wanted to kind of speak on that and kind of bring it to light. You could put into the comments, post up anything that you have in relation to this topic right here. I know it's two different topics in one video, but just whatever your thoughts are on it. You know, do you think that it's okay that people do that? What are your thoughts on the topic? And just kind of, like I said, spit your questions out into the comments. And if you got any other kind of questions that you want to ask the channel, go ahead, ask, and we'll tackle those issues in the next video. All right, you guys, catch you guys in the next video.